The Illinois Auditor General reviews state agencies on complying with state laws and reviewing their financial statements, and releases regular reports on these state agencies, and they're always a goldmine of delving into what's wrong with various government functions and a lack of oversight. Welcome back, Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk. And if you check out the Illinois Auditor General's website, you can find all kinds of audit reports, including breakdowns of pension debt and how much unfunded liability there is and so on. Well, yesterday, a slew of reports were released, including a pretty damning report on the Department of Natural Resources, a compliance examination. And if you go into further here, you see a summary. And having looked at a lot of audits in my time as reporting on what happens at the Illinois State House, you regularly see basically every audit. It's rare you see a clean audit where they're like, there weren't really any findings. It's regular that you find audits that have 5, 6, maybe 2 or 3 different types of audit findings, and those findings range from, material weakness of oversight or various other things where they miscalculated the fund balance here and they had money in a different fund balance there, or they didn't have proper oversight of equipment like trucks or computers or things like that, right? Sometimes you really find some serious problems. And when you look at the audit of the Department of Natural Resources, you'll see right up front it says that the auditor expressed an adverse opinion. You don't really see that too much in these audits, nor do you see audits totaling 37 findings, 27 of them repeated. So obviously, some of the findings, they didn't exercise adequate controls over its reporting on maintenance and accounts receivables. They did not have adequate controls over historical artifacts. In some instances, they had these artifacts that were ultimately, not where they were listed to be. And also, you had the artifacts essentially missing in this report. So we reached out to State Representative Wayne Rosenthal. He is a former director of the Department of Natural Resources, and he, of course, has some insight into this. So under the Rauner administration, Wayne Rosenthal was the director, and he said that a lot of these issues stem from a lack of employees.
Bottom line is, to me, when I look at it, is the sum of the same issues that we had before. It's just the lack of number of people to adequately do the job.
But ultimately, it's all about a lack of oversight.
Some things just get overlooked, or they just they don't get the attention that they need. And I don't think, if you look at it, there's nothing that was done intentionally.
So he says that, these are some findings, a lot of findings, more than I've seen in other audits, 37 findings altogether. 27 of them are repeat findings. But he says they're not overly serious, at least severe, or of the level of like fraud, for instance. So that's just one reaction to an adverse opinion for the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, the agency that deals with hunting and fishing licenses and also managing state parks and museums and so on. So a lot of findings with the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. Another audit that was released is on the Department of Employment Security. And again, just to kind of highlight here, you've got a different number of findings that are reported, 5 altogether. 3 of them are repeat. So not rising to the level of getting an adverse opinion from the Auditor General. But still, with as much money that's involved in the Illinois Department of Employment Security, this is obviously something that's very alarming to taxpayers, saying that the department failed to maintain accurate and complete pandemic unemployment assistance claim data. The department did not maintain appropriate controls over financial reporting. We're talking billions of dollars here, billions of dollars, and we still don't know the true scope of fraud there is with the Illinois Department of Employment Security from during the pandemic. Part of the report highlights how they just did not have the proper reporting that allowed for auditors to go in and fully review 2022, how much money was spent in fraud. Previous audits indicate around $2 billion in fraud, but we don't know the full scope. Somebody who's been keeping an eye on all of the unemployment payout situation, not just in Illinois, but across the country, is Mark Glennon. He is the founder of Wirepoints. I connected with him just to get an overview of his thoughts on this audit and hear some of his initial considerations when reviewing the 30-some-odd page audit report.
The main finding, the simple finding here, is that once again, they've continued, the Department of Employment Security has failed to maintain accurate and complete pandemic and unemployment assistance claim data. This is the special pandemic unemployment assistance that went out. This is, by the way, part of a huge national scandal. $60 billion lost to fraud, according to the last national estimate, $2 billion of which belongs to to Illinois. And Illinois has been dragging its feet and coming up with an accounting on that. The federal government has expressly pestered the state. The auditor went ahead and did this report himself. His early report found that $2 billion in losses. I mean, this is a scandal of the highest order, and that's no exaggeration. This rivals the largest scandal in American history, which would have been the Bernie Madoff scheme 5 or 6 years ago, which swindled some $72 billion, I believe it was, from the general public as investors. And this at $60 billion is closing in on that record.
So it's not just the billions across the country, it's the billions in Illinois lost to fraud. Those are taxpayer dollars, employers having to pay for more taxes to cover the losses because of the fraud that there was. And remember, the state of Illinois took out a massive loan during the pandemic to pay these unemployment totals that were spiking because the governor shut down non-essential businesses because of trying to slow the spread of COVID-19, if you recall, in March of 2020. I remember seeing those unemployment numbers week after week just spike. It got up to like 250,000 at one time. It was just incredible. But a lot of problems with IDES. And when you have an emergency being declared and forced upon the public by closing down a lot of workplaces, what are you going to do with all those individuals who were out of work? Obviously, you're going to want to get them some kind of assistance. Mark Glennon with Wirepoint says that what ultimately happened, though, was an abject failure. He says rises to the level of a national security issue.
One thing I'd like to emphasize, no one talks about this, but this is a national security failure of the highest order. The pandemic was not a deliberate biological attack, but it may as well have been. The results were the same. And you'd think that the very first thing that the federal government, together with the states, would have in place is a ready-to-go program for getting money out to people in times of that kind of emergency or a war or a major disaster of some kind. They didn't have that. They poured money into unemployment programs with no accounting or regulation in place, and that's why up to half of it, and those are estimates, up to half of it was lost to fraud. It's really unbelievable that they weren't prepared for this. And to my knowledge, they haven't done anything to rectify it either.
So again, Mark Glennon with Wirepoints sounding off on the audit of the Illinois Department of Employment Security released yesterday. And the audit, highlights the financial statements and shows that for the fiscal year that ended in 2022, the department was $115 million short in their finances. Now, since then, of course, you had the state of Illinois take federal tax dollars, I think it was several $billion, and they paid off the large loan that they had. But one of the things that the audit found was, obviously, again, finding that the Illinois Department of Employment Security failed to keep proper records for the auditors to be able to go through and try to determine where this money ultimately went and how much fraud there actually was. We still don't know that. But the audit said that one reason was because the department contracted out with a vendor. And if you look at the records, Deloitte was the vendor that IDES contracted with right at the start of the pandemic. to build out a new program for pandemic unemployment assistance and manage that program. Deloitte, over 2 years, got a 14-point-some-odd million contract, a couple of different contracts, and those contracts still continue with Deloitte now. One record I found was altogether over several years, like $100+ million in contracts with Deloitte. And I imagine that's for a variety of different services, but just $14 million for the pandemic unemployment assistance. But since they contracted that out, they obviously weren't able to get even more data that they need from that contractor. Glennon reacting to that.
In theory, there's no problem with retaining somebody in the private sector to help with this, but the buck stops with those who are on notice that the fraud was occurring. And this is not new. The Auditor General has been saying this for some time. So they've failed to rectify whatever deficiencies are the responsibility of Deloitte. And, when you look at the particulars too, some of this stuff really cannot be outsourced. I mean, one of them is failure to perform timely cash reconciliations. Well, geez, every tiny company does that once a month. Failure to implement information technology controls over the assistance program. So whatever they did with Deloitte was not adequate in the views of the auditor. This is really misfeasance of the highest order and extraordinarily costly. Even with these errors, by the way, the auditor found net that the unemployment fund is now $116 million in the hole. Well, that plus the cost of all this other fraud, the $2 billion, ultimately has to be fixed by taxpayers one way or another. Taxpayers or the companies, the employers that have to contribute to the unemployment trust fund. So this is not free money that's being lost here. It's going to cost everybody.
Again, Mark Glennon with Wirepoints sounding off on the most recent audit of the Illinois Department of Employment Security, equating it to a national security failure of the highest magnitude, not just because of all of the COVID-19 unemployment assistance fraud there was that went to other countries, but also the just lack of having a solid plan. And he says that maybe IDES is not the avenue for unemployment emergency dollars to go out, or any kind of emergency dollars to go out. Because some of the things that happened too were, if you recall, we reported on it pretty extensively when it was going on. You had employers, small businesses trying to survive while they were being told not to operate in-person business. They were getting unemployment claims issued against them. And they had to go and try to push back on those and object to those claims. And that was all muddled and muddied and difficult and hurdles and delays. And so it was just an absolute mess, but we're just getting more confirmation. The Auditor General doubling down that IDES had some substantial problems that have yet to be fully rectified. It is Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop. Follow along. If you want to keep posted on anything that's going on in and around the state of Illinois, we definitely do that regularly here. So be sure to come back for more, all right? All right, now we got to take a break. Stay tuned. Much more